how do you even get start the meeting so that you can vote over who gets to start the meeting? Can you just like announce like, hey, look at this?
Yeah, we can probably do that. We're gonna get started. I need to have a nomination for acting mayor pro tem. Yeah. So we can do that.
So as far as like the agenda, just
Yeah, because there's no
opening
call to
ceremony.
order.
Okay, so it's just opening
Yeah.
ceremony and then we'll vote you or Stu or
Yeah.
whoever do that. Are we, Nancy, if Carrie isn't here, are we still a quorum?
We're still a quorum, but
Okay.
everything else has unanimously. But she told me she would be here.
Okay.
So she hasn't told me differently. Yeah, and I didn't follow. I should have said, hey, you're going to be there, right? I figured she'd already told me that. Hello. Oh, good. There, it's on. Well, our conference starts in Burma tomorrow morning, and so I went ahead and said, I was going to go up there, and she just didn't feel like I could miss both meetings. Do my math. It just didn't fill. So I'm leaving as soon as we're done.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
How long have you been out?
It's about 3.5 hours. Yeah, and then, yeah. Oh, right.
It's nothing like Vernal.
I hope you're right. That's what I'm hoping for. I hope I'm going to say, my gosh, I'm so glad I went to Vernal.
Usher, 1 minute to get here. It's kind of smart, sparse. There she is.
Yeah, exactly.
The bumper stickers.
Okay, my phone says 7 o'clock, so we'll get this meeting started. I'd like to call for nominations for an acting mayor pro tem.
I'd like to nominate Bruce Young.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Of that
Aye.
nomination?
All right,
Okay,
so-
do make a motion to appoint him as mayor pro tem now?
Oh,
So, someone like to do that?
I make a motion, or I move, is it a move to approve?
Yeah, move to
Um,
appoint.
Move to appoint Bruce Young as the mayor pro tem for this evening.
Great.
Need to say the date? September 27th,
Yeah,
2016.
okay.
Second?
all right. Sorry. Thanks for coming out. This is the first time I've been here where we haven't, in 7 years, I think, that we
Call
haven't
for a
had
vote on that, would you?
Mayor Pro Tem. Sorry?
Would you call for a vote on that motion, please?
Oh, can I get a
Go ahead, yeah,
vote on that?
yeah. Go
All in
ahead.
favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm
Thank you.
jumping ahead. I'm not
No,
quite
you're
sure about
good.
the procedure, so. All right, so we'll get this started without further ado. We have Councilmember Peterson will be doing the opening ceremony for us tonight.
Thank you. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our dear Father in heaven, we come before thee this evening as citizens, as staff, and as elected officials on behalf of the residents of our city. We are grateful for the opportunity we have to convene freely and to be able to exercise judgment and to be able to act on the best interests of our city. We pray this evening for wisdom, that we might do the things that would best benefit and bless those who live here in Clearfield. We pray for those who keep our community safe, for our police and fire, for those who serve up at Hill, and for those who are deployed from our community, serving elsewhere, for them and for their families, for a safe and speedy return. We ask this evening that we might be able to carry out the proceedings and the work of the city without any obstruction or harm and incivility, and ask that we might be able to do this evening and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. So I'd like to excuse Mayor Shepherd and Councilmember Bush this evening. They're not in town. So as I was saying, this is a first where our Mayor Pro Tempore and our Mayor are not here. Jumping into the agenda, we have the first item of business. We have a public hearing to consider amending Title 11 Land Use, consider supplemental regulations for beekeeping in the R1, A1, and A2 residential zoning districts, and other amendments correcting references to the Community Development Director and Community Development Department. Do we have someone to present the background on this? And would that be all right?
Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, Spencer Briley, Development Services Manager for Clearfield City. This first item, which is a public hearing for the amendments to Title 11 specific to beekeeping, as well as some administrative amendments related to our organization within the city, getting rid of references such as Community Development Director and things of that nature, is what's before you this evening. This item was perpetuated at the request of the council to staff to identify the need that arose within the city relative to beekeeping. As it stands right now, beekeeping is allowed in the A2 zone. Subsequently, it would be the A1 zone as well as a conditional use. Clearfield City does not have specific language relative to the keeping of bees in our ordinance, and so at this time, at the direction of the council in a meeting in June, we have been directed to evaluate this consideration and ordinance in order to adopt it into Title 11 as a supplementary regulation. Additionally, to remove it from the A2, A1 zones as conditional use, and to allow it to be used as a permitted use within the R1 and A1, A2 zones. This item was presented to the Clearfield Planning Commission at their meeting on September 7th. The commission, after consideration from public comment and discussion as a commission, recommended approval of this item with some changes which have been included into the ordinance. Our Planning Commission chair is here for additional comments or questions related to that. But this evening, your consideration is just specific to a proposed beekeeping ordinance that would regulate how it is to be conducted, the regulations for lots, lot size, registration of hives, how they are to be situated on a property, as well as other additional regulations that other cities have also adopted relative to the keeping of bees within their municipal boundaries. That's more or less the background. I think we've talked about it in some work sessions just generally as thoughts from the council and as we move forward with this. But I'm happy to answer any questions relative to this, or we can wait till later.
I do have a question. After the storm, reading all of the information, I became very interested in what happens. There were so many trees that went down. I'm sure there's got to be a percentage of bee hives that are injured. Is there anybody here that can zero? what happens, though, if one is damaged? Is there protocol for the beekeepers, or, sorry, not beekeeper, beekeeper? Okay, I thought there was a special term.
We talked about a beehaver last time in the planning
Okay.
commission meeting, but
Okay.
we'll stay away from beehavers and just talk
Okay.
about beekeepers this
Okay.
evening.
So is there something that they would do in case a hive is damaged? Obviously, the queen may be killed. Like, what happens? I'm just really curious.
Most beekeepers, my name is Rob Gretchen, I'm your swarm coordinator.
Can we
Oh,
Can we
sorry.
move this to, let me open the public hearing at least.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So I hereby declare this public hearing open, and we'll get this on record.
Sorry, I went out of order.
Martin. I live at 1373 South, 1025 West in Syracuse. I am your Davis County swarm coordinator. When bees get loose, I get called. When bees, with the storm, if the hives had been damaged, what would have happened is most beekeepers keep spare brood boxes or hives that they can quickly, if one breaks, that they can quickly take the frames from one and shift them into another. If they don't, we have numerous beekeepers that they can call. They can call me. I think I got about 13 different boxes that I keep in the shed, just in case there's a swarm or something goes on, that I would gladly give them that they could do it. And, you know, if they needed help at a moment's notice, we could, well, give us 5 minutes. We could have a number of beekeepers there to help them take care of and collect the bees back up.
Okay.
But when like, I've actually had a hive blown over out in West Point at one point in time. The bees stay fairly close to the hive. They don't leave until they could find another place to do it. And if the beekeeper is there and can get it rectified quickly, they don't leave at all. And so they tend to stay right there. If the queen is killed, her pheromone would actually stay in the hive for 24 hours before the bees would actually start to disperse, and a lot of them would stay there anyway, and which gives the beekeeper enough time to set it back up. And if there is larvae, 1 to 3 day old larvae, or there are eggs present, they will begin to build a new queen. Because the only thing that it takes to make a queen is to not feed her honey and pollen, the bee bread. If they continue just to feed her their, it's kind of like mother's milk, which is royal jelly. If they just feed her that, she becomes a queen bee. And so the bees take care of themselves really quickly that way. And so they make sure that nothing is amiss in the hive. And they within 2 weeks, you have a new emerging queen coming out, and she goes out on her mating flights, comes back in, and starts laying eggs, and the hive remains calm. And so, but we actually had no hives. You'll find that beekeepers, by and far, are a very careful bunch. We're protective of our hives. And so I have 7 hives. I have 3 in my backyard. I have 4 in Clearfield right now. 2 are on A1 property, and 2 are in a residential property, and kind of hoping that I won't have to move them because they're my 2 best hives, and they're in my brother's backyard. And so we're kind of hoping they can stay there because they've been doing really well. The neighbors know they're there and haven't had an issue with them yet, because the bees, when bees come out of a hive, they've got about a 10-foot radius in front of the hive where they come out and they start circling up. And they get up to about 12 to 15 feet, and that's where they fly, 12 feet and above. So generally, you never see bees unless they're on where they're foraging on flowers or on trees when they're gathering sap and things to make their propolis, the sticky part that's in the hive that glues it together. And so, but beekeepers are really protective of their hives, and so we put them in places where wind isn't going to damage them, or if there's a chance that wind is going to be there, we like to anchor them down so that they are safe and they don't get blown over. Because nothing is worse than walking outside and you see your beehive is over, and the first thing you start doing is going, I need to go there. And if they happen to be mad because they got knocked over, you might get stung. Generally not. I've been stung this year 3 times. And all but one of those has been when I've been working at somebody else's house trying to remove bees that are in their house, that have gone in their walls or in their attics and things like that. And that's when they tend to get stung. They don't like you pulling down their comb and relocating them. And so that's when it tends to happen. Bees, by and large, are at their gentlest. Most people are worried about swarming because they think I'm going to be stung. Most bees won't do that. And I actually, when I go on swarm calls, I will go and I will do demonstrations, and I will be talking to the people while I'm doing it. And I'm generally just like this I am right now, a light colored shirt and pants that go all the way down. And I will go out there and I'll say the bees are very calm, and I'll reach out and I'll pick up the bees with my hand, put them down, and then lower them down into the new hive that I plan on putting them into. And so it's really, that's when they're at their most gentle. It's when something happens at the hive, they tend to get a little bit hot and want to back people off a little bit. But again, we do this. We're actually mostly in favor of the new ordinance. We really like it. It works well for beekeepers. It allows us to keep the right amount of hives on the size of the property. I think the only real issue that we had is there was one about having it in a fenced yard, because if you go throughout Clearfield, there are a lot of houses that just don't have fences. They'll have maybe a fence around the back of the property, but there's no fence between the front yard and the backyard. And we were kind of hoping that might be changed too, so that it would reflect somebody who has, like my sister has a side yard that is her biggest yard in her house, and she can easily keep it back away from the street if I were to put a hive there and keep it out of the way of everybody, but it wouldn't be a fenced yard. And so we were kind of hoping that might be able to be changed. I don't know where that would go, but that would be a real consideration, because a lot of people don't have those fences to go into. But I can give you some of the facts in Clearfield this year. You have beekeepers. I know several of them. This year I have handled 19 swarm calls in Clearfield proper, not to include the 5 trap outs that I've had to done or removals where I had to go in and get them out of people's ceilings and walls and remove them from properties who didn't want them, who were very surprised to find that they had bees and had no idea what they were there. Beekeepers are also really helpful with those type of things. We like to make sure that the bees are well taken care of and that they're in the right place. So I don't know if there's any other questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a few comment forms here. Kirk Middaugh, if you'd like to come up and speak. Please state your name and your address for the record.
My name is Kirk Middaugh. I live at 938 West Gentile Street in Layton. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I represent and serve as the Vice President of the Davis County Beekeepers Association. So we're here to speak primarily in favor of the considerations before you. We appreciate your staff and your Planning Commission and their work in considering those kind of issues that have been done in the work up till now in this. It does very much follow what other cities have done. Both the president of our association and myself are residents of Layton, and went through a very similar process last year, and this is very responsible and reasonable changes or amendments to your zoning ordinance, which we find out is how things are. I mean, that was news to me. The way you restrict it is unless your zoning says you can have something, you can't. And so this is very good. We do have the only really concern and something we would ask for your increased or consideration with this portion of the fence for lots smaller than 1/4 of an acre. There are just a variety of ways that lots are configured in the first place. In the second place, there are a variety of ways where a beekeeper can situate or partition a beehive away if that's the concern of it. For an example, my son lives in Syracuse. He has 1 hive. He has a fully fenced yard, but he also has small children, so he put a small field fence around it, a roll of field fence and 5 T-posts, and it partitions it off so the kids can't be up close to it and those kind of things, which I think are reasonable. A beekeeper, a new coming beekeeper will invest substantially in it, from $400 to $500 for a single hive and protective clothing and whatnot. And if you consider the expense of now requiring a fully fenced yard for a smaller lot, we just don't feel is necessary. So we'd ask for your reconsideration of that portion. Otherwise, we would speak in favor to this amendments to your zoning ordinance, and thank you for that consideration.
Thank you. Anna Whistle?
My name is Anna Whistle. I live at 510 East, 200 South in Clearfield. I wanted to thank you all for your time and consideration in the beekeeping ordinance. My concern is also with the fencing. My lot is 0.2 acres, and I don't have a backyard. I'm on a corner lot, and I have my hive currently sits in the side yard. It is 35 feet from the sidewalk and 15 feet from, so the sidewalk is west. 35 feet west of the sidewalk, and then it's 15 feet south. The property line is 15 feet south of the beehive, and then it's 25 feet east of the beehive is the property line. So I meet the spacing requirements. I just don't meet the enclosed fencing. It would be very difficult to fence that section of my yard. It's very awkward. Also, with the public sidewalk, there's that 35 feet, but then you also have a 4-foot retaining wall. So the sidewalk is actually 4 feet down, even from my property line. So if you consider 4 feet drop, plus, like the hive is way over here, and I have a lattice that directs the flight path up anyway, so it would be very rare that the public would come into contact with the flight path. So I just wanted to have you guys reconsider maybe that fencing rule. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also have Rodney Marchant. Okay, sorry. Thank you. That's all the forms that I have. Is there anyone else who's here to speak to this ordinance? Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, seeing no more requests to comment, I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. It's now closed. The second item that we have is another public hearing, and this is considering amending the Wilcox Farms Amendment Final Subdivision Plat for lots 8 and 9. The amendments will be known as the Clearfield Business Park Final Subdivision Plat, located approximately 939 and 919 West, 1600 South. And I believe, Spencer, you'll have that as well, correct?
Good evening again, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. Final subdivision plat 1608-0001 is an amendment to the Wilcox Farms subdivision plat over off of 1000 West and approximately 1700 South. This specific property currently exists as 2 parcels, lot 8 and 9 of the Wilcox Farms amended subdivision, shown here as the site. These are currently two separate parcels, lot 8 and lot 9. The proposal this evening is to amend this current existing subdivision and to create 12 units in a condo development sorts. I apologize, I'm not at my computer, and let me get back there. Sorry, that was our mapping system. So the proposal is to condo this particular site to create a building for the purposes of business use. So it would have 12 units. The applicant is here this evening and can answer specific questions to it. But the reason this is before you is because we are amending an existing subdivision. It requires council approval in order to move forward and complete the process here. But Relative to this, the Planning Commission did hear this application for the amendment to the subdivision, recommended approval to the council, since they are the recommending body. Additionally, the Planning Commission at their meeting on September 7th also reviewed the site plan proposal for this site. The site plan proposal is contingent on the subdivision being completed. Obviously, because of the CC&Rs that require individual units, common area, which would be the landscaping, the parking, and other such things, have been reviewed for the purposes of protecting the city and making sure that they are consistent with state and local codes, not to the benefit of the individual proposing. But at this time, the proposal is, again, for 12 units. You can see here in this upper corner, 12 units, parking out front, and it's consistent. The site plan proposal is consistent with the Clearfield City codes for all of the regulations associated with it. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that the council has at this time. We are recommending approval for it, of this proposal, again, because it does meet all of the requirements, and the conditions of approval have been included in the staff report.
Just a quick question, Spencer. Do you
Yes.
remember the year that the general plan was changed to reflect residential use on these parcels?
I did not, I don't have that information off the top of my head.
But this was a recent, I mean, like within the last 5 years-ish, but the general plan as far as the residential flip that
So
happened on that.
this property is commercial, so there's no residential component to this development. The condoing of this building allows for the individually owned business operation.
Oh, I apologize. I mean, like the Wilcox, the whole,
I don't have that off the top of my head, sorry.
But my question on that then is, on this one though, it still would retain the same zoning and everything like that. The
Yeah.
rest of it is that other portion of it?
Yeah, the eastern, if you'll recall, we've heard requests relative to the cul-de-sac area where Let Them Be Kids is to the north, and then there was a request to change from C2 to R3.
Okay.
That application has subsequently expired due to lapse in progress made on it, and we have notified the applicant accordingly, and I've spoken to the current property owner about that.
Okay.
But no zoning on this property would change. It would stay commercial zoning, but would allow for individually owned units with common area regulated by what they call CC&Rs, or code covenants and restrictions relative to the development.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions for Spencer? If not, I declare this public hearing open. I have no forms regarding this specific public hearing. If there's anybody who would like to comment on this, and please feel free. We don't want to exclude anyone. And if not, I would accept a motion to close.
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the public hearing is now closed. The next item of business we have on the agenda is citizen comments. This is where you can come and talk about anything in the city that you feel like speaking about. Is there anyone? I don't have any yellow forms for that, for public comment. But if there's anybody who'd like to speak, okay. In that case, we'll move on to the next item, which is to consider approval of the city's Community Development Block Grant Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report for program year July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016. Spencer, you have that again? I think we'll just have you stand up there.
This is the last time you have to hear from me, at least on these public items. So the CDBG, CAPER as it's referred to, or the Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, is for, as stated by Mayor Pro Tem, for the fiscal year ending in June. What this report says is what we accomplished with the CDBG funding that we received in the previous funding year. Clearfield City is an entitlement city, just like Layton and other jurisdictions. We are the only ones in Davis County, and so we have the rare privilege and opportunity to receive monies in order to invest and to build up our community. This year we were able to fund, and you've seen the report hopefully, and so I'm not going to go through every page of this document, but what I did want to highlight is just that we've been able to accomplish or are in process of accomplishing a project on 300 West relative to a street improvement project. Additionally, contributing resources for the continued operation of the Family Connection Center, Davis Community Learning Center, and Safe Harbor. And what that does is allow for some administrative costs to be carried with these CDBG funds to allow these organizations to provide the help and assistance to individuals within Clearfield City proper. The reason that those entities receive the funding is because of the service that they provide to Clearfield City residents. Stacy Milgate, who manages our CDBG program and does a phenomenal job, couldn't be here this evening, but I wanted to just be here to speak on her behalf relative to this report and see if there's any questions you have moving forward. No public comment was received during the public comment period. I should have said that because that's most important relative to the draft plan. It is marked draft still until we have this meeting.
I think I've heard this answer before, but I don't remember. With the funds for the help with down payment, how are residents made aware of that?
So the down payment assistance program is something that we're working on this year, a little bit more focused wise, but and you're going to have to forgive me, Stacy is the pro here, so I'm going to go back and look at some of her notes here. Let's see here. So Davis Community Housing Authority really helps us to facilitate that, and so we get a lot of questions because realtors are aware that Clearfield is an entitlement city, and so we get a lot of questions in that regard. And then through Davis County Housing Assistance Program, or housing program, they help to facilitate some of that information. But we do, I think we have things online as well as additional information, but I can get you additional resources. I'm just not sure of all of them.
And looking at the amounts that were given, $3,000 were given to 3 individuals, and then the remaining, I think, was like $1,700 or something. Is that because that's what the amount that was left? Is it typically people asking for $3,000, or are they coming in at a lesser amount?
You know, typically, I think they're coming in at about that $3,000 amount. And then with the administrative costs as well, we have some overhead there that we have to take care of for the Davis Community Housing Authority. But I think they come in right at that 3,000 mark is why that was the number that's been hit for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions or discussions regarding this? Okay. If not, I would accept a motion.
I move to approve Clearfield City's Community Development Block Grant Consolidation Annual Performance Evaluation Report for program year July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016, and authorize the mayor's signature to any necessary documents.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item of business we have is to consider approval of ordinance 2016-06, amending Title 11 Land Use, providing regulations for beekeeping in the R1, A1, and A2 residential zoning districts, and other amendments correcting references to Community Development Director and Community Development Department. So we've already had addressed some of this. I did have a couple questions on this, Spencer. The one thing that just piqued my interest, and this is not saying it's wrong or right, I really don't know. How were the number of hives determined? It seemed like 3 hives in a little lot. I'm not sure how big hives are, if that's a lot or if that's a little. How was that determined? I just like seeing you get up to talk.
You're all right. Well,
Exercise.
So to be honest with you, a lot of the evaluation and analysis for this came from other municipalities who have current regulations in place. And what we found was Layton City has a very specific breakdown starting from 0 square feet up to the quarter acre. And the basis for the 3 hives was really looking at other municipalities and their acreage to see kind of what they did. There wasn't a lot of number crunching relative to that. It was more of a comparison between what lot sizes Clearfield has, which we have a lot of parcels from 0 to a quarter acre. And we figured because of that, 3 hives was probably an appropriate number to apply to that situation. Now, that doesn't mean that it's formulaic and there's some sort of, A plus B equals C here. However, looking at other jurisdictions and the language that was provided from the Davis County Beekeepers Association, we felt like that was just consistent because we allow for 5 on a half acre and more on larger lots. We thought we should start somewhere instead of just going 5 and up. Give them a little bit of a progression there to allow beekeepers who can participate to do it on a smaller level, and as they're able to expand or get additional property, they can expand their operation there. But like you heard, there is about a $500-600 cost associated with it, and so I think that's just a good way to say we don't want you to get crazy out there, but but
Yeah.
to provide you the opportunity to do so. So.
Have you been able to verify with some of the cities whether or not that seems to be a good number they've had?
Yeah, I've spoken to the planner in Syracuse, and his comment was, it's pretty much self-regulating. We don't have any issues or problems relative to the beekeeping. Now, Syracuse has been able to build bigger lots, and so they don't have as much impact as Clearfield does with kind of smaller subdivisions and smaller lot sizes. But again, speaking with them, it didn't sound to me like there were any issues that they had come into contact with. I didn't speak to anybody from Layton City. They just had a change in their staff. And so their planner has just left, and the new planner didn't really have any idea what problems they had had in the past, if any. But from speaking to the jurisdictions, it didn't seem like there had been any problems relative to their current regulations, which would allow for 3 hives on something less than a quarter and so on.
All right.
I had a couple of questions I had a chance
Okay.
to talk with you earlier
Uh-huh.
about. First one, I keep thinking that this scrolls and I can't.
I
keep touching
can
it
scroll.
and trying to do this and
Just yell scroll and I'll move down.
it's
As long as I don't have
sadder
to
when I
sit
do it
down
on
again.
paper and I do, no, it doesn't expand. Okay, first one, under the section on hive lots,
Mm-hmm.
just relative to the language there. Let me get down to here.
Right there
Or
on
is it-
should.
Oh, gosh, where am I at here? There we go. Underline what's under there. No hives should be located in the front yard. My question there is just on the language on that. Should becomes really arbitrary, and I'm concerned that that puts it, that it becomes difficult, like where one person may and one person may not want to enforce that. And I want this to be as fair of an ordinance as possible, so, that anyone who wants to do this in the city knows what to expect. In that same vein, I'd be curious from Tim, just from the discussion that they had there, we have a proposal here for fencing. We've had a request to look at some kind of a screening, but it would be something different than, not necessarily fencing, but some kind of a protective something. So I'm not sure what kind of discussion, if any, you guys had, if screening came up part of the discussion part that you guys had. So I guess there's kind of 2 there, and then I had a third after that.
So before Tim speaks, I'll just say part of this could have been lost in translation as I took the language and started to input it into the requested changes. There's no reason that can't be shall.
Okay.
It would allow a lot more clarity for those who want to do or who want to be beekeepers within the city, as well as staff from an administrative standpoint to say, oh yeah, shall not be in the front yard. That says no way, no how. So I think that's beneficial if we want to make that change to the ordinance. I'll let Tim talk more to the discussion that was had at the Planning Commission relative to enclosed yards and areas being separated for other users.
Yeah, I'm just curious whether if it was, fencing specific, or if screening even was an option, or what was the?
Our discussion came about just from having the beehives be protected and
Okay.
not in an open space. So we had multiple options. We didn't talk about fence height or anything like that. We were also out of public hearing, so we weren't
sure,
able
in
to allow
discussion.
for other comments from other people. So there was some points made tonight that, were a little more educational to our decision that I think will benefit the council as well.
So as far as the council's concerned, then it was, as far as the request then for, the fencing on there was the protection of the bees, and then also property owners, just general protection then, or?
I think it came about from just general protection.
Okay. Or separation, or-
In our neighborhood, I know of some beehives that I didn't even know existed there. So, sometimes if someone was stumbling across it or, just didn't know something was there or was uneducated. So I think that's where the basis of it came from.
Okay.
So I wonder, because wisely, this was based upon a lot of other cities' ordinances. Do they have similar constrictions on fencing their hives? Or maybe that may be an unfair question, but
So some do and some don't. I mean, to be completely honest with you. And I have a presentation that has more of that language in here, and I didn't include that specific to this. But every city has a little bit different twist on how they choose to regulate. And again, you look at Syracuse City, which has, basically minimum quarter-acre lots. They're not really concerned about how close somebody is to their neighbor because they're not close at all. In Clearfield City, where we have a little bit smaller lots, they range in 6,000 to 9,000 square feet, some above that, some not so much. There is a concern when it comes to being that close together and having some proper separation. Now, they can make the argument, or it has been made, that the flyaways would provide that separation. However, a flyaway sitting in a yard, which is just a a way to keep the bees above basically everybody's head so they don't run into anybody. And that's simplified. That's not technical. That's a very simplified description of a flyway. But what the enclosure or separation or fencing, however we choose to define that, allows for the mishap that somebody wanders into that yard and interacts with a beehive that isn't meant to. And as you heard from Mr. Marchant, they are docile, they are good to go, unless you walk in there with, I don't know if they're attracted to red or what, but you tick them off, you're going to have a problem on your hands, right? And nobody wants to do that. And that's the intent, is to be able to mitigate any of those potential mishaps or hazards. And granted, the regulation may seem a little bit strict, but at the same time, our responsibility is to apply the ordinance holistically to the city and to be as mindful as we can to specific situations, but we have to look at this as applied to the city as a whole, and it's hard to make those specific changes to one lot or two lot or a handful of lots.
So, one of the considerations I have, and I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, but it's also the perception, I think, of people that haven't been educated like we have on the nature and purpose of beekeeping. What I envision is somebody in a neighborhood, their children going down the street and just seeing a beehive there and just naturally being afraid of it. Right. And so I worry about the perception, even though we understand now, but probably the bulk of our population doesn't understand that, and I worry that they say, well, don't, if you go out to play, make sure you don't go to that house because I'm worried about what could happen to you. You see what I mean? And
I think, and again, back to my point, where we apply the ordinance holistically to the entirety of the city and try to manage expectations and do the best that we can. And just to give you an example, I have 4 little kids. The oldest is 11. They have an irrational fear of anything with 4 legs. Irrational. It's completely baseless. And yet, if they see a dog 20 yards out, they're freaking out like that thing's going to be Cujo or something, right? So that fear has not been instilled by anybody. It's just been something that they understand. And I think bees are very much the same way. There is a irrational fear of bees. And I'm going to take this presentation and home and give it to my wife so we can have a beehive in our backyard. But I think the educational part of it is essential. And the Beekeepers Association of Davis County does a great job of trying to get people involved and trying to educate people in this aspect. But I think until people really understand it, the city needs to take certain steps to make sure we mitigate any of those fears to the best of our ability. That may seem a little bit over-regulatory or strict, but at the same time, we have to look at everything in its entirety. And although it may seem a little difficult right now, I think that's an appropriate way to approach an ordinance.
To your point on that, the kind of my follow-up question on that was under the hive section. B, where it gave a provision to be able to have a little bit of flexibility as far as where the hive was placed relative to that lot line, and that you could have some, you could come, you could move around that lot line if you had a waiver signed by the adjoining property owner. I love the flexibility part. I get like one of Anna, I think, said, where you've got different lot sizes in Clearfield where that might make it easier. My concern on that language, though, is granting or making the rights of a beekeeper contingent upon the goodwill and nature of their neighbor. I can see, and we dealt with this a little bit as we had discussions years ago on chickens. If placement of a hive or some kind of rights associated with something is contingent upon it, I look at what the difficulty of the city is if there's some sort of a falling out with a neighbor. Can the neighbor then rescind authorization, and then a beekeeper who's invested, and put in substantial time and energy to do this, then could have a right that they have vested taken. Does it become something where if you have a turnover in a property that you have to get new consent each time someone comes in? Then it becomes you have rights, kind of. Mm-hmm. And to allow something, I want to be able to say, if this is allowed on your property, then do this and let's get out of your way, and you have it and you can do it and we will stay out of your hair.
Well, this is just saying if they're locating their hive on someone else's property, which
no, it was the.
So in B of hives, it says hives shall be placed at least 5 feet from any property line and 6 inches above the ground as measured from, blah, blah, blah. However, this requirement may be waived in writing by the adjoining property. So if they want to be closer to the property line than 5 feet, then the property owner can say, hey, that's fine with me.
Yeah, so your back fence neighbor says, I don't mind if you throw it right up in the back fence. Doesn't bother me, I'm fine. and then, hypothetical, their kid gets stung by a wasp, but in their mind it's bee, and, or there's any kind of disagreement. I don't want to put us in a position where we tell residents that they have a right and they can invest in it and they can have this use on their property, and then be able to kind of pull it back where
Right.
it always does this. I'm concerned about, that just being, whatever it is, whatever the setback is, that's what it is, and it's cut and dry. And, no one else can infringe on their ability to put that hive there and set it there, and not have to have it kind of moved arbitrarily. So I don't like the waived, I mean, again, I love the flexibility of it, and if you've got an amicable relationship, that's great, but I see the potential for that to come back and bite really quick. So I would be in favor of striking that.
Isn't it the same thing, though, if you plant a tree near a property line, they can either let it grow or they can cut it down, the part that's over their property?
Yes, well, it's a fair argument, and in the storm, I had 2 of those come down in my yard, and we're still cleaning them up.
Sorry,
yeah.
Councilmember Peterson, if I may.
Sure.
The only difference between what we're doing here and what you just referred to, Councilman Young, is we don't regulate the placement of trees on your property, and
true.
so it becomes a civil issue regardless. If that tree grows and your neighbor says, I hate that tree, you better cut it down or I'm going to chop all the branches off that are on my side, it's a civil matter because the city doesn't regulate that. In this instance, we would be proposing the regulation for the location of these hives, and so therefore we would either need to be specific, like Councilmember Peterson is saying, or provide language that we're comfortable with that allows for the flexibility, but also the regulation to be intact.
If there was any flexibility there, I would say if it was at the discretion of the zoning administrator, that at least you would have a city entity that would do that.
Okay.
But again, I worry about it being arbitrary.
Yeah, when you look at a case-by-case evaluation of properties, it does become difficult to be
And
consistent.
and the whole thing is if it's an ordinance and it goes citywide, we have to find the best fit citywide, and we can't go lot by lot. So I would be in favor, as far as the hives, would be just to strike that, as well-intended as it is, to strike that. And then as far as the hives on lots, whatever that's, the screening would be, that the language was not arbitrary, that it would be, if it's not in a front yard, then it's not in a front yard at all. Or there's, whatever the discussion may be, but that it's clear and uniformly applicable.
So I understand what your thought is, that the option to locate closer than 5 feet would no longer be available then?
Yeah, and I don't know enough. I appreciated the pamphlet that the Beekeepers Association provided that we were able to look through right after this came through last legislative session to look at that, and if there was discussion as far as, if it was 5 feet from the property line, or even if there was a different number that would be a better fit, I would defer to that judgment. My concern there is that it would be stated, and then that is the regulation, and that it wouldn't be subject to interpretation, that it would just be agreed upon, and then that's it, whether it's 5 or 4,
On the other issue
whatever
is
it
that
is.
properties change hands, and the new owner,
I say, if the previous owner was fined for 10 years and a new owner says, for whatever reason, I have an adverse
allergic
attitude
to
toward
bees.
bees, you've got to get that as far away from my property line as possible, then again, to me, it feels like we're jerking around the use of property that our residents have. Let's clearly define it and then let them do it.
Okay.
So I want to jump back to the fencing for a second. It was stated that, as stated, if somebody comes into the hive and messes with the hive, then that's the only time when the bees can be feeling like stinging or whatnot. And it just seems to me that some sort of screening, I don't know if we need to say that the hive itself has to be fenced off or that the yard has to be fenced off. I don't know if that's language that makes a difference or not, but I think it's, and for the reasons stated before, I just wanted to say I think that it's probably important to make sure that at least the hive is fenced off so that we don't have kids wandering in and playing around with it and causing issues with that way.
Nico, you were talking about screening. Did I miss that in here, or was that just
in the
your,
public comment,
because
and I
of her
apologize if it
comment?
was-
Okay,
Were you the one who mentioned screening in Layton?
okay,
Where they'd mentioned some kind of screening, and so I was
Okay.
curious if.
okay.
So just to draw your attention, if you go back to this page right here, you'll see flyway area. And so this is somewhat what was referred to that was had in Syracuse. So a flyway area is basically an area goes around the hive that makes sure the bees go up and out instead of at somebody or at something or lower than they ought to. So the flyway area is meant to keep them above 6 feet so that they don't have to interact with anybody and nobody bothers the bees in that regard. This is somewhat a screening technique, an enclosure technique, in order to allow that separation. You'll see here there is specific language, and I tried to define it to include it into the definitions, but there's also a whole area, on flyway that is more specific there. But I think if the council is not comfortable or feels like there's a little bit too much restriction relative to enclosing, requiring enclosures or fencing or whatever the case may be, this flyway area is required around the hive itself, specific to it, and so that's something to consider.
So have we defined the flyway enough to make sure that it would be securely enclosed?
So yeah, we've patterned our ordinance after several other ordinances, Salt Lake City being one of the main ones that we utilized in the analysis of this. So I think the flyway area, as identified in state statute and identified in other codes, is consistent with what we have here.
So make sure I'm understanding this. So there's essentially a 10-foot wide wall, fence, dense foliage, or combination, 10 feet in each direction. So
right. So if you have
if you had it in the backyard and you had to have a fenced backyard, it's sort of redundant then.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. So this would require that to be around the hives specifically, whereas if you had an enclosed yard, a fenced yard, something of that nature, it's somewhat redundant. Exactly.
So then striking the fenced yard and just leaving the information in the flyaway area, is that?
If the council would like to do so, again, I'm just going to go back to my previous statement that there is an educational gap here when it comes to bees being kept in Clearfield City, and there may be a lot of concern and additional complaints relative to, I see these bees, they're going to get me, because they're not in some sort of enclosed area. So, I mean, the council is able to, if they feel comfortable with the flyway area as the regulatory tool for the screening of these facilities, that's completely up to them. Otherwise, we've got both included in the current proposal.
My concern was that perception, and I hadn't dawned on me there. But so I'm just trying to think of, my wife walking down the street and seeing a hive, but if she sees it fenced in, then psychologically, whether it's the yard is fenced or whether it's enclosed, I think she's just going to not be as stressed. Even, it's the same thing with the dog. If the dog's behind a fence, then I can deal with that.
Do you have to take the bee on a leash whenever you?
The next page, bee leashing.
Only if he's a pollen job. Yeah.
Yep.
Bees don't do things in your yard that dogs do. So that's true.
I had a Spencer at the work session, and, and I'm not sure, Anna, if it was your property that we had a picture of a home in Clearfield with a hive on it within a front yard placement. So I'm not sure if that was your property or another one. From what I recall of that photo, with the current situation of that hive on the property, I don't remember seeing any kind of an enclosure or a readily identifiable flyaway enclosure, wrap, screen, anything like that was on that. Did I miss that? I mean, we had a copy of it. But.
So yeah, if you recall from the picture, and those were only provided to give you an idea of the irregular configuration of some of our lots and where these hives are being located. And like I stated in that meeting, getting on the state registration website, we have over a dozen hives within Clearfield City. Legal or illegal, I didn't verify, just that we have that many individuals who are keeping bees. With that one, because we don't have any current regulations for that specific discussion, I would assume that the property owner at that point just put the bees where they did and tried to screen them as best they can with a lattice type of structure to provide some of that separation. Their house, because it faces 500 East and the way it's configured, would be in a side yard. It would be okay in a side yard, which wasn't huge, but was spaced well enough off the property line. If we impose regulations like this, that hive would have to have additional screening and things associated with it to provide the separation. Otherwise, there is some fencing on the property, but as she stated, there's some grade changes and some other difficulties that would have to be considered as we looked at that.
In its current configuration, is it a completely screened yard or a fully fenced yard, or only in the area in which the hive is located?
So
In the proposed language right now?
It would be
Completely
it would be an
enclosed?
enclosed yard. So because of the ability to have it in the rear or side yard, if you enclose it, then it was kind of up to you to where to put it.
Okay.
But the
So that was
enclosure
the
was
concession
the
on the side yard was, the screening was to offset the additional
Right.
ability to adapt to a uniquely configured lot.
So originally, we had only proposed the rear yard to be allowed for beekeeping, and it was the request of the public at the planning commission meeting to allow for side yards as well. And the concession and kind of agreement that was made is the planning commission decided to require enclosure rather than just open yards, putting them wherever you wanted to. So,
So I'm reading this now, which is a little bit different than your overview here. In the flyaway, it says, there's an if statement here, such flyaway, if located along the property line or within 5 feet of property line. And then it says, then that will have necessary. So if it's not within those constraints, then it doesn't need to have the wall around it.
that would be accurate. I did,
Yeah.
like I said, I definitely simplified the definition of
Yeah,
flyaway
I
area.
understand that, I just.
But yeah, you're absolutely
yeah.
correct. There are additional kind of caveats or if-ands that would go there.
Okay, so then if we were going to change it and keep some sort of barrier, then we could say something along the lines of that it has, I mean, how would we change that to make sure that it either has a flyaway or it's in a fenced yard or something like that?
I think you would just take the flyaway area and it would no longer be an if, it would just be a required screening or to be located around the hive itself. If the fencing or the enclosure of the yard is going to be removed, then I think the flyaway area probably needs to be stated as a requirement and not just an option depending on location of the hive in the yard.
Alternately, could the fence be considered a flyaway?
As long as it didn't conflict with the flyaway description in the code, yeah.
All right.
So let me reiterate that, make sure, so if we took away the if in there, then if it's in a backyard, then the fencing in the backyard will fulfill the requirement of this.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be a redundancy. there.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
Am I had a
So
look of
were you
concern
be-
here. I just want to make sure.
You're considering an either or, that a beekeeper would be required to meet one of the two stipulations. It would either have to be an
Essentially, yeah,
enclosed
yeah.
yard or provide a
Or-
substantial flyaway.
Yeah,
That could
yeah.
be, is that what you're, okay.
That's what, I would feel really comfortable with that.
Because I see where Spencer's coming. There is a disconnect right now, and so I hate to make this more restrictive than it is, but something that is going to allow for that, so.
So we have not had any complaints. People haven't been attacked by
No one has died.
bees.
So yeah, you'll recall originally, so when this came before the council back in June of this year, there was an individual who called and asked that code enforcement come out because their question was, are they allowed to have bees? There wasn't a complaint of it attacked me and I'm dying. It was, can they have bees? And so our code enforcement went out there and evaluation was given because it's a residential zone. We didn't allow for it. And so that's kind of how this all came to be. So we haven't had any complaints. In fact, I requested that of our Clearfield Police Department. And I think in the last 5 years, it's been 5 complaints, but they've really been, can I have bees or can my neighbor have bees? Because they have bees. There's been no like, the bees attacked me type
Okay.
of situations.
So obviously, people are using their common sense, in my mind.
Right.
I'm not one for regulations. I understand why we have them. But for somebody like Anna describing her situation, she doesn't have it fenced off, but she has it, sounds like it's quite private, so people can't see it. The need for a fence is, again, redundant. It's already being protected. So for me, I'm fine with striking the fencing part of it. People are using their common sense, and that's what we ask them to do. So
The only thing I would.
if we're not having problems, I don't know why we have to cause a problem.
I would just
personally.
require one or the other, though, some kind of screening, so that if there is not a clearly identifiable, is the word in my mind I come to, flyaway, and perhaps more substantial than just foliage, but I mean, a distinct screening that allows, that would provide some kind of an appropriate barrier, then a
Right.
fenced yard would be required. Did it
Depends
be
on
an
the
either or?
foliage.
As
Not
opposed
audible.
to you have to have a fence in order to have the bees. If it's, I'm good with the way that it's saying in the flyaway area, but to have a fence in order to have it. If you have the flight zone already established, I don't see why the fence is also necessary for that as well. Because we haven't had problems, I don't see everybody running out and going to become a beekeeper at this point if they don't already have them.
After this meeting, who knows?
Well,
Spencer.
I know, it's quite packed in here.
I'll report here in a few, well, we're getting into the cold season, so we probably won't have that many requests. I'll talk to you in spring.
Follow-up question then, if we were to go with then, to kind of circle the wagons on this one, if we were to go with an either-or approach to that, in your opinion, is the language then in the flyaways, if that were to be the only barrier there, would you recommend any changes to that as far as foliage or things like that, where it'd be a more substantial screening on that, because we're making that concession instead of traditional fencing? Are you comfortable with that, or?
So staff is completely comfortable with the way the flyaway area is
Okay.
defined and outlined. So the only difference between what the flyaway area requires and what the planning commission had intended is they didn't talk about any specific requirements for heights when it comes to enclosures or fencing. And so an individual could technically put up some split rail picket fence around their yard and call it an enclosure and some sort of separation. So the 6 feet requirement, I'm completely fine with that. We also require that the hives don't exceed 6 feet in height, so it's kind of consistent in that regard. There's still going to be a cost associated with the keeping of bees on a property. This may be a little less burdensome because now you don't have to enclose the whole thing, just specifically around the facility itself. So staff is completely fine with that, realizing that there does need to be some changes to the language within the code to reflect current discussion.
So then dispenser then, would you be comfortable with a change up on the fly that would reflect an or on that, or would you want tighter language? Yeah, dispenser. Did I say Spencer?
That's all right, we get
Stewart.
confused all the time.
I'm so sorry.
I'm just glad people think I'm so good looking.
Spencer 1, Spencer 2.
Spencer 2, I'm so sorry. Yeah. On there, if we were to kind
We
of,
would need to strike under B, correct?
Uh-huh.
On this one.
Yeah, I'll go
if
up.
you were to do,
Sorry. Don't touch the screen.
Underline.
I don't have a,
Sorry. It's the page we can't get to. There.
Tim, did you have something on, just as far as
I just
commission?
wanted, yeah, and Vice Chair Murray reminded me of this, was when we talked about it, we didn't talk about necessarily securing the entire yard.
Okay.
Just to have the beehives be secured in some way or another. So,
with the council discussion then, if we were to go with an or, with the focus then being on screening but allowing options, would that be consistent with the intent that the planning commission sent up with the
I
recommendation?
think that would be fully acceptable with what the planning commission discussion
Okay,
was.
just that would run, thank you. I appreciate that.
So we're talking about hives,
I
bee?
think, yeah, the may be maintained in finished yard, right? That's the number that you strike out to the period of every 1/4 acre. They maintain finished yard in residential lot up to 1/4 acre.
So I guess I'm
We're
just
still not
looking
letting, are we allowing the front yard?
No, front yards are still
Side or
disallowed.
rear.
I think we need to clarify that
Right.
language based on Councilmember Peterson's discussion to be shall.
Yeah.
Yes,
No hives shall be located in the front yard, but then to strike the language relative to the fencing. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, just
May
So-
be maintained.
Does that, are you comfortable with that as far as?
So I'm confused because the flyaway has that if. Do we need to take the if out of that flyaway statement also?
yes.
Okay.
On the other,
That'll need to be
Yeah.
stricken as well.
the other page.
Okay, yeah.
So this one right here, where this if statement is.
Because
Thank you all for your patience.
Page
Right,
3
this
is
is
the
the
ordinance.
ordinance writing on the fly.
Is it right here?
One way or the other, I think we've inadvertently caused a double barrier anyway, and so
Yeah.
we need to,
Yeah, so it's just, making sure that it's clearly reflected here.
yeah.
That's why I'm going to defer to Stewart/Spencer too.
The irony is that's my older brother's name, so I spent my whole life answering to that.
Is that,
And I have a more disturbing story about Stuart. Not him, but me, but anyways.
So
well, we appreciate you working on that.
Yeah, it sounds like the fence
Done.
yard is going to be stricken per the council.
Is it something we could come? Do we have the ability to come back to language, take like, we have the ability to like, take like come up with something like, give me 2 minutes and let me scribble this down and come back with that? I don't
Well,
know,
let me-
like, is that a possibility?
If we're done with this, I have more of an editorial kind of a thing. Maybe we can stall while we're done with it, while they work out the wording.
Bruce, what did you like?
Yeah.
In the
So we're-
definition of hive, it intrigues me because it says, you know, frame box, or frame hive box, hive barrel, log, gun skep. But then later on, when it talks about hives, let's see. It specifically says that they will be kept, hives honeybees kept in hives with removable frames. It just seems like one of them is really broad, but this one restricts it. So I guess that's all right.
Yeah, so this definition is, as I outlined there, is what's annotated or is Utah Code annotated specific to what a hive is. And so this specific definition of what a hive is different from...
It's more restrictive than the state definition.
Yeah, so this is just more of what the hives need to be looked at and how they can be managed on the property, I think specific to the hive, but the definition of hives is very broad when it comes to the state statute, which is what other municipalities have used, which is why we just included it as well.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, while they're kind of working at that, do you mind if I ask a question on just the supplementary stuff that was attached to this one as far as this agenda item? Just some of the administrative ones that were also looked at on there? On the Title 11 administrative stand on that, other than just changing the terminology on there, was there any substantive changes?
No.
It was just the city rather than the specific title on that?
So you recall, we went and did administrative changes recently because of our organizational chart. We no longer have a community development director, and so we wanted to make sure that the ordinance reflected the current organization. Zoning administrator, development services manager is my title, and because a lot of those responsibilities were previously given to the individual in my spot who had a different title, we wanted to make sure it was consistent. So there's no changes to the language regarding regulation. It's just specific to the organizational administrative.
Well, and that brings up a good question that, now that I'm not thinking about bees anymore. The as I saw it, it changed it to city in all those cases.
Correct.
So how does that work? Does that mean that somebody over at the Aquatic Center can then approve it?
So the intent there was to clarify the language for the organization, and the request by city administration was to just be broad and say city. So the language is there that it says zoning administrator is making all these decisions, but then it's referred to as city instead of community development department. Yeah. So it could have been community development office, but with community services, I think there was a concern that we might get a little confused there, so we just went with city to be a little more broad. But
does that open us up legally so that it can be?
I don't believe so. As we've discussed it internally, there was no concern that might open up some opportunities to be litigated against relative to that. So I think there was no concern from.
And no lifeguards approving it.
Yeah,
No
lifeguards are not approving land use.
They might do a good job. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think we're safe in that regard.
I think I'm not a lawyer, but I think you could go back to intent, and if we make in this meeting clear that the intent of this ordinance is someone appointed in the city to make those decisions, but we don't want to, then I think that becomes clear. I mean, if the attorneys ever drag it and it said, well, it just said the city, and so I checked with somebody at the Aquatic Center. And they say, no, it has to have somebody that
In
is
that department.
appointed to make that decision within the city. And I think, I don't think we need to change anything. I think we should just make that clear when we vote on that. That's our
On
intention.
record
Is that's what,
declaration.
All right.
yeah.
So Stuart, are we going to have a language to be able to vote on this, or is it too muddled up?
Now we're going to catch up with the other conversation.
Okay.
I think we got the bees.
The bees
We're going to
the
be
birds.
voting on this tonight?
Birds are going to be bees.
So, are we ready to have a motion on this then? Or is there any more discussion on the?
Could you just read
This
us the
one.
draft language then? The amendments?
So it would state, as provided in this section, and notwithstanding any contrary provisions in Title 11 of this code and apiary,
consisting of not more than 3 hives may be maintained either in a fenced yard or in accordance with the requirements set forth in Section E of Title 11, Chapter 13, Section 36. Subsection there.
And that was, I'm trying to find.
So that's
it.
the first paragraph there
As
within.
far as the, okay.
So it's under hives on lots, A. That's the language that
Oh,
they've now
okay.
included in or for fenced
So we don't
yards,
need this,
or
so it is set forth in-
the appropriate
okay, I like
regulation
that better.
included for flyway areas, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that right, Nancy?
And then-
Remove
Remove
the if language at the end of
Yeah,
that.
so on page 3, I've marked, yeah, item
Could
E,
you
but
scroll
page
to
3.
that, where they're at?
Yeah, right here is the flyway area, correct?
Yeah,
Is that where you're-
flyway area.
Yeah, thanks.
We would
Before
remove
E.
if, and then we
Right
would
at the
take
top there.
on, I wasn't through in paragraph 1, no hives shall. We'll change should to shall, and then we'll remove if from the flyaway paragraph.
Okay.
If you're good with it, Stuart, I'm good with it.
Okay.
All right. In that case, I'd accept a motion on this.
Your Honor, I move that we approve ordinance 2016-06, amending Title 11 land use, providing regulations for beekeeping in the R1, A1, and A2 residential zoning districts, and other amendments correcting references to the Community Development Director and Community Development Department as amended, and authorize the mayor's signature to any necessary documents.
Second.
Second.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. This is a roll call, correct?
Correct.
Councilmember Phipps?
Aye.
Councilmember Benson?
Aye.
And Councilmember, as always happens to me. Peterson.
Aye.
Not to you, it's just somebody I'm going to forget.
And you can vote, Mayor Pro Tem, you can vote.
Sorry, and I vote aye as well, so that passes unanimously. All right.
Thank you.
And I've enjoyed having the bees on my flowers lately.
My apple trees.
Next item of business, last item of business we have is to consider approval of amendments to the Wilcox Farms amended final subdivision plat for lots 8 and 9, known as the Clearfield Business Park final subdivision plat, located approximately 939 and 919 west and 1600 south. Now, we've already had this presented to us earlier by Spencer. Is there any more discussion on this?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to approve the amendments to the Wilcox Farms amended final subdivision plat for lots 8 and 9. The amendments will be known as Clearfield Business Park final subdivision plat, located at approximately 939 and 919 west, 1500 south, and authorize the mayor's signature to any necessary documents.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just wanted to clarify that should be 1600 south. We'll fix that in the motion, but I just wanted you to, that was a typo,
Okay.
so.
Oh,
All right. And any opposed? In that case, that motion passes unanimously. All right. So, next communication items we're down to, and I have nothing to report this evening. I will not be reporting anything this evening. But thank you all for coming out. And let's go to Councilmember Peterson.
A couple things. The North Fire District purchased a ladder truck earlier this year that they're having retrofitted, and that'll be expected to be into the fleet into November. They are just finishing a lot of the prettiness on it, paint and detailing out for that. So we'll be happy to have that back in service so that we have 2 ladder trucks that can deploy, and this summer we certainly saw the need for having multiple aerials. Wanted to just recognize Spencer and JJ and Stacy. They were recognized by the state of Utah, particularly Lieutenant Governor Cox, for changes they have made to our community development department in recognizing Clearfield as now being a business-friendly city. And there was a lot of work that went into that. So congrats to them. That was awesome and huge for our business department. Wanted to thank everyone who helped out with our community. What was the right word? Preparedness fair? Was that the name of it? From Laura Lewis. We had the first chance to do that. And then also just a thank you to police, fire, public works, everybody who helped during the storm. I was out driving in the middle of it, and it was amazing to see, one, just how fast stuff was cleared, but Also wanted to recognize just everybody within our staff that made the allocations and made the decision a long time ago to make sure that our emergency generators were used to power our stoplights. I was from one end of the valley to the other over the course of 3 hours right after the storm hit, and getting through Clearfield was the easiest part of the entire thing because lights were out everywhere else. And as soon as you got to Clearfield, half of them were up and running, and the ones that were out had people out and they were moving them through, and that was the easiest part of getting up and down the valley. So huge thank you to everybody who made that. That was kind of a crazy day, and it was really well handled in our city, so thank you for that.
It's good you brought that up because I'd be remiss if I didn't. I was out in the middle of that, and I saw, I think, everybody in the city out there working, and it was, you could tell everybody was busy that night. All right. Councilmember Benson.
So the reason I was right on time, I was not late, as I was entering, we had a scout troop visiting our police officers, and they brought treats, and they were downstairs thanking the police officers. So I took a picture, and I will put that up. I could even send that to Marlis. It touched my heart that all these cute little, I think they were bears, did they say? I think they were bears. Is that the first? Is that 8?
Yeah.
8-year-olds? I think they looked young, so 8 years old. And I gave them a challenge not to wait till the day before they're 18 to get their eagle. I witnessed this in my own house. And then I also went to the transportation meeting in West Point. Was it last Friday? Yeah. 2 Fridays ago, a week and a half ago. And I didn't send the information out because before I could send it out, they had already sent it out. But I did want to acknowledge that I got up during comments and I asked them to look at State Street right by North Davis Junior High again, because I drive past there and it is just a crazy intersection. So if you have driven past there, you can see they have their little metered things set up, I'm assuming to count the cars. So please go over it as many times as you can. Turn back around and go over it again. Let our officers know, just keep circling that block. They said they would do their best, but really it depends on numbers. But I have witnessed accidents there. I have witnessed kids almost getting hit. I have rolled my own window down and flagged people down behind me because they're not paying attention. So that intersection right there is, it angles. It's just a weird intersection for a crosswalk. But I did ask them to relook at that so that we could have some kind of solar light that the kids can press. And in that meeting, they discussed many options. So I took that opportunity to use those many options that were out there to try and get that in Clearfield. So I believe that is all. Thank you.
Councilmember Phipps.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on Wasatch Integrated, and we talked before a couple of weeks ago about the potential of expanding that facility. I went through a presentation again tonight at our committee meeting where they gave a lot more detail on that, and I've got quite a bit here. I don't think this is the forum to bring all that up, but have the detail, the numbers and everything like that I can provide, and perhaps we can discuss that again in more depth. I think I confused everybody on the meeting schedule, so I thought I'd outline. We meet at 4:30 the fourth Tuesday of every month in a committee meeting, which is a subset of the entire commission. And so a handful of us meet there, and details, much like our working sessions, although they're not formal meetings. So that every month, but every quarter, the first Wednesday of the quarter, we have a formal commission meeting where we act and vote on things. In the meeting in November, which will be the first Wednesday of November, I don't remember what the day is.
Second.
The 2nd of November is when we will be voting on whether or not to issue an RFP for the development of this. Okay, so I need to get a sense of how we as a city want to approach that by that time period. So either that or you'll leave me unattended, and so.
Can that be put on an agenda so that we can discuss it in a work session?
There is also, and I really think it would be worthwhile, on the 18th of October, there's going to be an open house there at 5 p.m. Of the Because if you haven't been there and seen what the existing energy recovery facility is, and I showed you a couple of pictures before, that the conveyor belt and what happens there, it may be good to go and get a perception so you can see that only multiplied to increase what they're extracting out of the waste stream. So, and in November, in late October, it won't smell as bad as it does right now.
Did you say that was Tuesday the 18th?
Tuesday the 18th at 5 p.m., yeah. And they've talked about even providing a light lunch, although I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, we probably shouldn't have it right there at the burn plant, you know? So.
They do the meals at the sewage district too, so I don't know.
Yeah, I guess, you know, you go to work there every day, you're used to it, but people eat lunch. But, okay, so anyway, if you want, I've got quite a bit more detail and information on that, including long-term cost estimations and the breakdown of the bond to which they propose to pay for it, things like that. So.
Yeah.
And I appreciate too the work of the city. You know, in any kind of an entity, you find out how you really work and how good you really are in a crisis situation, and to see the city come together, resolve that really quickly is just a manifestation of the effectiveness of a well-oiled machine. And I don't even perceive how much sacrifice went into that, of people giving up their home lives and everything like that, and to going out and doing that rather than saying, wow, that's terrible weather out there, I think I'll stay home. And instead they got out, you know, and went to work. And I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Now, no city manager, so staff reports.
Just schedule, you should have seen an agenda today for next week's work session, be interviewing the communication coordinator and a few other things. And the 25th for sure. And if we'll need one on the 18th, we'll let you know as that develops. So, I don't know where the year went. It's October already. So, that's all I had.
I have some. We should probably acknowledge and say thanks to Annie for staying late, stepping in, and
yeah, Annie stepped in
being
to
here to
help
help
tonight.
going
I'm
above
very
and beyond.
grateful for her help. Thank you, Stuart.
That way she gets her name.
Or
on the record.
Spencer, or whatever your name is.
Spencer too.
It's usually me that calls them each
thank
other's
you.
names, so.
All right, are there any other staff reports this evening? If not, I'd accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We stand adjourned.
Oh. Well, oh, no, and I know I'm still not here. I gotta go drive 3.5 hours. Yeah, we'll be good. What's that? 3.5. I'll be okay. Lots of snacks. As long as I'm eating, I'll be fine.
I just felt like we were in the B movie, so I wanted to bring Betty in.
I we have to buy a bee leash now. A bee shirt for the mayor. These are my list. But Tim, like, I wrote it down. It's important.
Taking your bees for the walk.
I have like this planning commission, like every hour spinning, like. Can't do it. Yeah. But they got, I mean, it was, they say, we heard you, maybe not the best, and you have two options. Have a fence or fly away, I don't care. Get a bee leash, like make sure you've got like appropriate leashing on your bees.
We have a leash law.
All right, guys, we don't have to have a fence, but we are going to require leashes. Captain, we did, all of us overlooked it and forgot the bee leash ordinance, like there was no bullet point G on leashing the requirements for bees now.
On what? On leash?
Leash requirements for bees.
Well, you know, Chris Horrick,
Yeah.
they came in and complained because bees were pooping on their yard.
Bees.
Yeah, then one neighbor came in and said, those bees are pooping on my yard.
I'd like to see what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what.
So, anyway,
They're called seagulls.
I was gonna say, and I told Tim that, the reason we put enclosed is because if you know what my yard looks like, my side yard looks like a front yard.
Yep.
And it's as open as anything, and if they allow it on any side yard without some kind of enclosure, that's,
An enclosure is reasonable. I mean, it's,
yeah.
again,
And so when we said enclosure, we weren't saying you had to fence your whole yard. We wanted to enclose the bee
I
hives.
didn't feel good about making them out here.
yeah,
You're just asking for trouble.
yeah,
Yeah, they got to be some kind of enclosure,
yep.
not sitting out, you know, if they're 5 feet away.
Even if they are docile, you still have to enforce them.
You still have